Heading south of the Mason-Dixon, this is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 270, covering the week of July 12th through July 16th, 2021. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab page, and subscribe to our YouTube page. You can find those social media accounts, at least everything but the Gab page, at our new webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org. We're going to get all those social media accounts straightened out on that page. But go over to Gab if you want to get a Facebook experience for us right now. We're not sure if we'll get our Facebook page back or not, but we're using Gab now. So we try to reach people in as many places as we can, and I know some people have said, well, you should get rid of all the other stuff. We don't want to do that because we want to have as many places to reach people as possible. You don't want to limit yourself. So it's important that you get over to the Gab page, though, and follow us there. Also, give us an email address. We'll give you a free ebook, Exploring the Southern Tradition. We had a glitch in that. We've got that worked out, so get that email address. We'll get you that free ebook. If you did not get the book, just shoot me an email. You can get my email address on the website, mcclanahan@abbevilleinstitute.org, and I can get you those ebooks if you did not pick them up by giving us the email address. You'll get our Daily Dose of Dixie Monday through Friday, or Tuesday through Saturday, or sometimes Monday through Saturday, depends on how we're structuring it that week. But I know it seems like a lot, but I mean, it's just one article. It's a way we get you interested in what's going on our website. Our new website also has information about our events, about our Abbeville Academy, abbevilleacademy.org. It's an awesome thing we do our monthly webinars, which we have one coming up probably July 28th, so keep on the lookout in your email inbox for that, July 28th. I think we're going to be doing it on music, but I don't know 100% yet, but it's going to be July 28th, whatever we do. So that's a Wednesday, the last Wednesday of the month, so keep on the lookout for that. That's another great thing that we do. We have our videos. Those videos do cost money. If you like the videos that we put out, and you like the website, and you like the podcast, you like all that stuff, consider a tax-deductible donation. Each video costs us around $3,000 just to put together. So if you like more of those, and I think they're a very good way of reaching people, consider that tax-deductible donation, to the Institute. It is tax-deductible to the full extent of the law. And so we exist on your generous contributions. I mean, this is how we keep going. Share material around on social media. Rate it wherever you get your podcasts. Most people listen to it through Apple Podcasts, which is our primary listening method. But also download our mobile app. You can get that now off the website. Purchase some Abbeville Institute apparel. We've got great high-quality embroidered stuff. Lots of great ways to support the Institute. So let's talk about the week. I think we had some really interesting stuff. And, of course, here we are on the week after the Jackson and Lee monuments were taken down in Charlottesville, and very quickly right after this was all set up. I mean, they were ready to go. They took down the Lewis and Clark monument there in Charlottesville as well. Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea monument right there in Charlottesville. It was preordained. They were going to do this. They had an quote-unquote emergency meeting. Let's take that one down too, and they got it down. Because at the heart of all of this is not a concern about racism or systemic racism or white supremacy or any other nonsense they talk about. The heart of all of this is a complete destruction of traditional American society, of which the South is the greatest contributor in American history. So this is why it's easy to take down Confederate monuments. It will be harder to take down monuments to the founders. Lewis and Clark is an interesting case because Lewis and Clark certainly were in the founding generation, but they weren't George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. They weren't presidents or major political figures. But, I mean, their expedition, the Corps of Discovery, was one of the most amazing things that happened in the early 19th century. And the fact that Sacagawea was sitting on the monument with them as an honor of cooperation between peoples and cultures and how that even worked in this Corps of Discovery. But, of course, the Corps of Discovery brought with it Western expansion and white Americans moving in and abusing American Indian tribes. We can't have that. We can't celebrate that anymore. But the simple fact that that took place and that people were able to traverse the entire North American continent, which was amazing, and then come back. In the 19th century, the early 19th century, that was an amazing feat. Be no different than going to the moon in the 1960s. The amount of technology and fortitude and things that it took was absolutely amazing. Or, say, going to Mars, as we're looking forward to other extraterrestrial exploration in the future of humanity. So these things are pretty amazing, and I think that, again, it shows the absolute disdain these people have. If you look at the leadership group there in Charlottesville, it's a joke. If you look at who these people are, they're a joke. It shows the absolute disdain these people have for traditional American history. And they're going to take down, I'm telling you, before this is all said and done, you will probably see most Confederate monuments around the United States taken down. You had a former mayor in Tuskegee go out and start taking a chainsaw to the Confederate monument there in Tuskegee. He was arrested, though he I'm saying that. He wasn't arrested. They didn't arrest him. They just told him to stop, and then they didn't arrest him for whatever reason. Because, well, this is okay to take a chainsaw to Confederate monuments. I mean, that's all right. It's kind of like when the Union broke George Washington's staff, essentially, and they're in Columbia, South Carolina. There's a statue of George Washington in Columbia, South Carolina. And the Union, supposed guys that were fighting for the principles of George Washington, broke the monument. Why? Because they weren't really fighting for the principles of George Washington. They were fighting for the principles of King George, another George, of unification, forced unification. Washington doesn't fit that agenda. You see, none of these people really fit that agenda. The Southerners like Lee and Jackson and even Washington and Jefferson and Madison and Monroe, and we'll even say nationalists like John Marshall, they don't fit the narrative of America, of the modern narrative, which is everything is exploitive, everything is bad, everything is evil. In my own podcast this week, I talked about how the battle for 1776 is going to take place, and it's going to be a very negative view of America against another negative view of America, and there's not going to be any positive view. You see, the Southern view of America is positive. Self-determination, self-government, individual liberty. These are positive things. The right of a people to self-government, to govern themselves in whatever way they choose, the citizen, the body politic, the citizenry. Now, we know that, but blacks weren't part of that. Well, could women vote in New England? No. Could blacks vote in New England? Not until 1860. In some cases, they could vote in the South before they could vote in New England. Now, of course, they were then disfranchised in North Carolina. But there was a serious discussion of it in other states at one point, Virginia. So where do we go from here? And they were only allowed to vote in certain New England states where their population was so insignificant that they weren't going to swing any elections. It's very easy to be virtuous, to virtue signal that way. Well, look, we're going to give blacks the right to vote here in Massachusetts when they're not going to even factor in the elections. And they knew it, which is why they were willing to do it. But in places like Ohio, where you had to pay a $500 fee just to go live there if you're black, or Indiana or Illinois, where you were essentially banned from living there, I mean, this is the North too. And so these people weren't interested in competition from former slaves or slaves themselves in farms. So, I mean, the virtue signaling is just ridiculous. But the South represented the most conservative part of America. It represented the spirit of America. The spirit of 1776 comes out of the South. It's the Jeffersonians. Now, certainly Northerners believed in this stuff too. We have examples of that all over the place. But that whole idea was built and based in the South. And I think that's the important thing to understand about all this. This is why they want to tear it down. And so when you look at the pieces that we produced this week, and there was a lot of good stuff, you look at the first piece of the week, The Star That Is Called Wormwood by Enoch Cade, and he writes, he says, there's fundamentally something evil here, and that's tearing down the monument that was in Asheville to Governor Vance. He says, it is the destruction of a memorial built by Southerners to commemorate a Southerner that led us as we resisted the locomotive of progress. It is the erasure of Southern memory, Southern past, and the Southern people, the Scots-Irish pioneers who came to the Blue Ridge Mountains in the 17th century and carved Asheville out of the wilderness. Asheville must be remade, altered beyond recognition, as the city itself put it, to make it as though we never were there. There's a technical term for this. The ideology of the rootless, the hyper-mobile. It is associated with a hatred of tradition, of history, of people, with traditions and history. It is why the Democrats hate the South and Southerners, and why the Republicans never miss a chance to throw the South and Southerners to the wolves. We stand in the way of the Celestial Railway. What your critics find inexcusable is that you are celebrating your people's past, our great friend Paul Gottfried once told us, which was a profoundly conservative one, based on family and community, and those who created and defended it. Perhaps there is an element of jealousy here. For all their twaddle about community, there is this fake, manufactured, non-organic, disposable, derived from spreadsheets, business plans, and PowerPoints, nothing more than a grab bag of Frankfurt School for dummies, bullet points, and fuzzy hipster BS that will vanish the minute enough of us get together and tell them to take their crap back to elsewhere. We Southerners have a land or tradition, a people, a place, a patria that they do not have and will never have. At some level, they know it. It violates their safe spaces. But it is not just a Democratic thing, it's also a Republican thing. And as our old buddy Walt sermonized, it is the American thing. God said so. Permanent revolution worked ever upward and westward toward a Nashville continent, nay, a Nashville planet, swarmed by rootless, hypermobile, cosmopolitan, atomized consumers consuming disposable consumables. There's a term, technical term for these people, Americans. And so he says, this is what's happening. It's a restructuring of America. It's altered beyond recognition. To take down the monuments is to remake America, to continue the process of remaking America, as Barack Obama said in 2009. And as Bo Trawick points out in his piece, the cyclic march of history, this is all by design. It's all by design. As Kay points out, it's all by design. It's a part of the revolution. We're living in it's a soft revolution right now. There has been violence. There has been death and bloodshed. It's a soft revolution, though, that has to be consummated to get rid of these things. And then supposedly when that gets there, we'll be all better. When the monuments are gone, and maybe the people are re-educated, and they're told through their critical race theory courses that all these people are bad and these people are good, and we've now decided in our 250th anniversary that the War for Independence was a bad thing because it did all these bad things, then maybe we can build something from the ashes. But it's not going to happen because these revolutionary people always consume. That's their entire purpose, to consume, to topple, as one historian called it. To topple. The idea is to topple everything. They don't know how to do anything but topple. They don't build. These lefties don't build anything. These progressives don't build stuff. They topple stuff. They know how to build state systems that benefit them, but in terms of real things, they don't build anything. They can't. They can just tear down. Trawick says, what then are the policies of the woke revolution today? Progressives are indoctrinating malleable minds with critical race theory through the woke media, through the endless virtue postings of radical politicians and race hustlers, through judicial pedophagy and torturous twistings of the Constitution, and through the government-controlled public schools that have taken over child-rearing responsibilities in these profligate and irresponsible times. To gain power through universal suffrage, progressives are seeking to level society to its lowest common denominator by promoting and sanctifying society's basest animal appetites. The anti-West and anti-white critical race theory has replaced the traditional Marxist class conflict with a race conflict. So it appears now the money trust, financing these progressives in yet another iteration of the Rothschild formula, is preparing to foreclose on Western civilization with a race war. The demand now is that Western civilization repudiates its heritage from Virgil to Jefferson for the sake of equity with those who have none, and take a knee to the eternal African present. As ever, the basic dichotomy will remain, only the nightmare will have changed. Enslavement to a totalitarian affirmative action bureaucracy surrounded by a wall of skulls, with Wall Street and the money trust beaming benightedly down upon it all. And I think, again, this is the idea. The people that are going to come out fine in this are the financiers. It will be the Wall Street class. It'll be the political class, the managerial class. But who gets bulldozed in the process? And they're going to find some group to make that work, right? But who gets bulldozed here? Well, all of real America gets bulldozed. in the process. That's who gets bulldozed in doing all this. And I think that's the real danger in all of this stuff. If you go back, in a piece we ran this week on Friday, which I found to be, it's a little bit out of theme for the Institute, Monuments According to Pliny the Younger. But it talks about that adherence to tradition, and the reason we decided to run it was because he mentions Bradford and MacDonald in the beginning of it, and how important Roman history was to a teaching of Southerners and Americans, and how Pliny the Younger was certainly interested in monuments. He says, Pliny the Younger understood, this is Justin Peterson, Pliny the Younger understood, as we all do, that there have been words spoken that throw postmodernists into a certain psychosis due to their inability to understand them. The monuments themselves were and are the first to show all of those who want to reimagine the war with intent to censor and erase the Southern culture and tradition. Those postmodernists use the method of junk history and political narratives in order to accomplish their attempts, which calls us once more on the battlefield where our ancestors once stood. We will, as Jeff Davis uttered before his death, contend once more. The monuments, secondly, were not meant to immortalize the people, though they were, in retrospect, people worth remembering. It was the deeds, honor, and character that the monuments bore, in which we should all strive to be and accomplish. Regardless of what people think, they hold a certain metaphysical aspect that supersedes the person or people the monument is dedicated to. Thirdly, when the monuments were put up, the Southern morale was down. Reconstruction had been and still was battering our ancestors to death. What better than to raise a monument and bring that same spirit that they had shown during the war and the same remembrance of those men back? Now, for those who try to argue that they were there to intimidate, the answer would be yes. However, they were not there to intimidate the certain race of people that are currently trying to erase or censor the monuments. In fact, the economic statistics widely debunk that theory. However, as Pliny would have made known to Tacitus, to fix the standard by their laziness and false delicacy would simply be ridiculous. But when he says they're there to intimidate, not by race, but to show defiance, and in fact this was brought up, this monument of Jackson is here for defiance because we refuse to be bulldozed by the progressive era. They said it. They did say that in the dedication ceremonies. In particular, one to Stonewall Jackson. This monument is here to show defiance to the Yankee order. And that was something that Southerners were still concerned about in 1896, 1892, 1905. They were still concerned about these things because they saw America moving in a direction that they didn't really care for a whole lot. And of course, remember past when you had a real federal government. You didn't have that anymore. The other side likes to point out they were there for, to show supremacy over a race, but those things weren't. Sometimes people talked about. I mentioned this on this episode on this show before. Anglo-Saxon meant all kinds of things. Abraham Lincoln was described as an Anglo-Saxon. Does that make him a white supremacist or whatever? I mean, whatever point you want to make about this. But this is all just bunk. It's all junk history designed to take away from what these monuments really stood for, which was the best of Southern civilization, and by default, the best of American civilization. I go back to E.L. Godkin, who wrote after Stonewall Jackson was killed, that America would claim Stonewall Jackson, not the South. America would claim him because he was such a great individual. He would be regarded as an American, not just a Southerner. This is E.L. Godkin, a guy that firmly believed in the Union cause, but yet he certainly believed in the virtues of Jackson. And I think that's the amazing thing about all of this and why we need to remember these monuments and remember these people. It's not surprising that they're being targeted for elimination. Lewis and Clark are targeted for elimination because they represent something that was the best of American society, and it's a threat to people that are not there. They can't recognize greatness because it's a threat to them. Now, that said, there's also this idea that we had an original 13th Amendment, if you want to get into Lincoln, and we do this stuff, so changing gears just a little bit. John Marquardt, our resident historian in Japan, one of our resident historians in Japan, writes the amendment that never was about the original 13th Amendment. He says the date of the latest federal holiday, June 19th, was touted as the one making the end of slavery in America. While few today would argue with the idea of honoring emancipation, the selection of that date in 1865 leaves much to be desired. If one truly wanted to commemorate the legal end of American slavery, the date for such a memorial should have been December 6th. June 19th is merely the day in 1865 when Union troops under the command of Major General Gordon Granger landed in Galveston, Texas, and of course told the slaves there that they were free. He says there was one major problem with that, however, for even if Lincoln had the legal authority to free people in another nation, his 1863 proclamation clearly stipulated that slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States shall be free. The relevant words in this case being then in rebellion, but as the war was over and Confederate government no longer existed, none of the southern states, including Texas, were still, as Lincoln had termed, in rebellion. Now he said, speaking of the 13th Amendment, it is also interesting to note that even after the fighting a 4-year war to maintain the supremacy of the federal government, of the rights of the states, and all of Lincoln's endless rhetoric about preserving the unity of the nation, the writers of the amendment still saw fit to state that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The writers had also added the now controversial phrase that involuntary servitude would be allowed as punishment for those duly convicted of crimes. Moreover, the Slavery Amendment also called into question, even in Lincoln's own mind, the legal authority of the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln himself termed his document to be only a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion. At the end of the war's second year, events continued to be going badly for Lincoln. His party, while maintaining control of Congress, had lost 27 House seats in the 1862 elections. Internationally, the threat of British and French military intervention was still very real, and on the war front, the fighting, particularly in the East, had produced no major victories for the North. His efforts to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond by campaigns both down the Shenandoah Valley and up the Virginia Peninsula resulted in a string of stinging Union defeats. Moreover, Lincoln was being constantly pressed by the abolitionist radical Republicans to take some positive step toward ending slavery. Such urging finally forced him to prepare a proclamation to that effect, which he said would be issued at the appropriate moment. That came after the battle at Sharpsburg. Even though slavery was supposed to end at the beginning of the coming year in the 13 states then in rebellion, but not those still in the Union or in other areas controlled by Union forces, Lincoln must have had some doubts as to the document's actual effectiveness. Just a month prior to the date of the proclamation was to go into effect, he proposed in his 1862 message to Congress a much different and highly detailed plan for gradual emancipation. His plan called for a constitutional amendment, which would have been the 13th, mandating in the first article that slavery in all the slave states must end no later than January 1st, 1900. Despite Lincoln's public denial that the 11 southern states had actually seceded and formed a new confederacy, but were merely in rebellion against the United States, he realized that a new constitutional amendment would require those states to rejoin the Union and participate in the ratification vote. If adopted, the amendment would give each slave state, including the 4 that remained in the Union and the new state of West Virginia, 37 years in which to devise some form of full emancipation. Ever with an eye on the northern economy, Lincoln then laid out his detailed scheme in the second article as how the staggering dollar costs of the war could be ended and peace restored. This would be accomplished at less cost by compensating all the slave states for emancipation through reparations to be paid in the form of interest-bearing government bonds. So he gets into here Lincoln's plan, which would have allowed for slavery to exist up until 1900. In fact, what's interesting is that, when Lincoln was proposing this to Delaware in 1862, he said 30 years, 1892, 1893, we could work out a compensated plan to end slavery. So Lincoln was not necessarily interested in ending slavery immediately. That was something that came about as a result of the way the war ended. But Lincoln was certainly interested in ending slavery over time. But this is unknown about Lincoln. It's thought that Lincoln just wanted to end slavery, and that was it. Of course, Lincoln's fingerprints were all over the original 13th Amendment, which was before this one, which would have made slavery permanent in the southern states and would have denied it in the western territories. In other words, it was an unamendable amendment that made slavery permanent in the states where it already existed. But Critics said, well, that's already the case. I mean, the states can decide to keep slavery if they want to or not. The general government has no control over that. But I like this because, of course, it gets into this little history lesson with Lincoln and understanding who Lincoln really was and understanding what Lincoln really believed. Lincoln, as a great emancipator, is not that way. Now, of course, he was pushing for emancipation here. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But not the way that it ultimately worked out. Because Lincoln saw problems in that. I mean, he certainly did, long term, and how this worked out. And, of course, Lincoln was interested in colonization and other things, which was something that he thought needed to be done to try to solve a growing, what could be a race problem in America, as you try to integrate large numbers of former slaves into American society. And talking about integration of people into a society, the last piece I want to talk about this week is Rules for Northern Immigrants by Leslie Alexander. And this is about immigration of people from the north into the south. And the piece says this: I write this for your own good. Your children manners need attention. We all know the relocation of the South is to their eternal benefit, and we are more than happy to oblige, but things must be said. Ma'am and sir are not optional here. To paraphrase one of Jordan Peterson's rules for life, never let your children behave in such a way as to make Southerners dislike them. Teach them while you still can. You don't need to understand this, you just need to do it. If you do not, we will have to correct them ourselves, and we will probably still dislike them. Number 2, we have guns, lots of them. If you are moving south to escape high taxes and you're afraid of firearms, please turn around. Your son, little Jimmy, may visit his friend's house and see a bunch of them in a gun case or in the closet. He may even see one in the car glove box. In fact, hold on to your hat. The parents of little Jimmy's friends are probably packing. Embrace it. One that I really liked. Northern immigrants of the South understand that we will be correcting your children, your teenagers, and even your young adults if the need should arise. We may even correct you, if only by a look or an expression, signifying disapproval of your unmannerly conduct. So watch your P's and Q's. Don't be loud and obnoxious. You will get a look. Control your children in public. You may get another look. This right to correct is wired into the Southern DNA. It has never died, nor will it. Poor conduct affects everyone. It seeps into the soul of a place like poison, bad theology, or heresy. Here we still resist this. Know it. And 6, understand that we have our own mind here. We are not tools of big government, hence our social decisions are not made by faux guilt inducement, cultural Marxism, or media propaganda. We don't walk around apologizing for who we are. On the contrary, we honor our history, our ancestors, and those who made our lives possible. It is our duty to them. We respect white men and black men, tall men and short men. We honor stay-at-home mothers and mothers who must work. We respect the legal immigrant on the corner with a successful business. We want to know him better. We admire beautiful young women and accomplished old men. We acknowledge the potential greatness of every person, even gender-confused young men with man buns, shapeless, protein-deficient physiques, and aimless expressions. They are lost, but they came by it honestly. They can, too, be resurrected in a resurgence of genuine local culture. All deserve their due. All have equal dignity in the eyes of God. But falsely constructed diversity repels us. On the other hand, authenticity compels. Here our friendships happen organically, not according to some perverted notion of inclusion that destroys freedom and natural impulses. If you are coming south to bring some misguided idea of social justice, please know that it will be vehemently opposed. If you are coming south to tell us whom we must like and dislike, save yourself the trouble. Please help us like you. We really want to. Now, this is the problem with northern immigration in the South. These people are coming in and they bring what is with them to here, and that's the issue. There's, going back to that idea that people are accepted here, this is Flannery O'Connor writing about how, there were strange people in the South, but they were all accepted because of what the South was. Now, I wish that the South was still this rigid in these things, but it's not. There are certain pockets of the South that certainly are, but they're disappearing very quickly. And it's because of the mobile man, as Enoch Cade pointed out in the first part. So we have that to bookend. The traditional against the mobile person coming into the South and trying to change everything, to bulldoze it, the continual revolution. This is the key to understanding what's going on to remake America and why it must be resisted at in the South as much as we can moving forward, and why local matters in trying to maintain local community and local continuity. All right, hope you enjoyed this week in review at the Abbeville Institute. Until next time, good day.